In tonight's episode, we have two terrifying stories to share. Each one born from the soil of Asia, where folklore and the supernatural blur into something far too real. The first story takes us into the restless heart of Bangkok's Phrakhanong district, a place that still trembles under the shadow of its most infamous ghost. Her name is Mae Nak. To some, she is remembered as a tragic young mother. To others, she is a warning of what happens when love refuses to die, even after the body has turned cold. The story begins with a husband returning home from war, stepping into what he believes is the comfort of his wife's arms and the gentle cry of his newborn child. Neighbors whisper, shadows linger. But he doesn't see them. For him, home feels alive again. Yet, what if the people you loved most, the ones you thought were waiting faithfully for you, were no longer among the living? What if every embrace, every word, every smile was nothing but a haunting lie? This is the story of Mae Nak Phrakhanong, a tale of love stretched beyond the grave, a tale of devotion twisted into terror, and a haunting so powerful it refuses to stay buried. The story begins in Bangkok, in the old Phrakhanong district, where the streets seem to carry more than just the weight of time. The air is thick with humidity, but it is heavier still with memory, as though every corner hides a whisper, every alleyway conceals a prayer spoken long ago. People pass through the district as if they are being watched. They avoid eye contact with the shrine that still stands there today, its offerings of incense and flowers left by those who know the story all too well. The main character here is not simply a ghost. She was once a woman named Nak, a young wife, beautiful, and deeply devoted to her husband Mac. Their story should have been simple, a tale of love and family. But fate was merciless. Mac was sent away to war, forced to leave Nak behind, heavily pregnant and alone. The sound of distant battles would replace his voice, and the cries of a child would replace hers. But before Mac could return, tragedy struck. Nak died during childbirth, and with her, the fragile thread of normal life was severed. And yet, this is not where the story ends, because when Mac finally came home, he did not find a house draped in mourning. He did not find emptiness, nor silence. He found Nak waiting for him, smiling, welcoming him back into the warmth of their home. At her side was their newborn child, alive, fragile, and crying softly in the night. To Mac, it was as if nothing had changed, as if the gods themselves had spared his family. He believed he had been given back the life that war had tried to take away. The neighbors knew otherwise. They whispered to one another, warning him that what he saw was no longer his wife, no longer his child. They spoke of death, of shadows, of the funeral that had already taken place while he was away. But Mac refused to believe them. How could he? When he looked into Nak's eyes, he saw life, devotion, the love he had clung to through every battle. When she spoke, her voice was the same as before, warm and tender. When she held him, her touch felt real. Still, a sense of unease hung over the house. Animals avoided the place. Neighbors stopped visiting. The once lively home grew isolated, like a darkened island in the middle of the village. And though Mac ignored it, the people could see the truth. Nak was no longer alive. She had returned as something else. It is here that the story begins to twist. Was Nak's return a blessing or a curse? Was she a spirit clinging desperately to love, or was she something far darker, fueled by rage at the cruel fate that had torn her from her husband and child? One thing was certain. The Phrakhanong district had become her domain, and anyone who dared interfere would face her wrath. This is the setting for what comes next. A house that looks alive from the outside, but inside is filled with something unnatural. A husband, blinded by love. A wife, who should not be. And a community caught between pity and terror, praying that the truth would not destroy them all, because the longer Mac remained with Nak, the stronger her hold became. And soon, something would happen that would rip the veil of illusion wide open. At first, life in the small wooden house seemed almost ordinary. Mac returned each evening to the familiar glow of an oil lamp, the soft rustle of Nak preparing food, the gentle cries of their newborn child echoing in the background. After the horrors of war, this peace felt like salvation. It was as though he had stepped back into a dream he feared was lost forever. But to those who watched from outside, that dream was a nightmare already unfolding. The first signs of unease came not from Nak herself, but from the villagers who could no longer bear the weight of what they knew. They had attended her funeral. They had seen the body lowered into the earth, wrapped in white cloth and blessed by monks. To them, every smile Nak gave Mac was a cruel illusion. Every step she took was a trespass against the natural order. Whispers began to spread through Phrakhanong. Children were told not to play near the couple's house. Mothers pulled their sons and daughters away whenever Mac approached, clutching them tightly as if his presence alone could invite death. Mac noticed the distance, the way neighbors turned away from him in the marketplace or refused to meet his eyes. At first, he thought it was pity, or perhaps resentment for his survival while others had not returned from the battlefield. But the more it happened, the more he began to sense something colder, something closer to fear. When he asked them directly, they only shook their heads and hurried off, muttering prayers under their breath. One evening, an elderly neighbor found the courage to speak. She approached Mac outside his home, her eyes darting nervously toward the doorway where Nak stood smiling, cradling the baby in her arms. The old woman whispered hurriedly, "That is not your wife. You must leave, before it is too late." Her voice trembled, her hands clutching at the beads of her necklace. Mac's heart tightened. He wanted to dismiss it, to laugh at the suggestion, yet the neighbor's fear was too raw to ignore. He turned to look at Nak, standing so serenely in the doorway, her features bathed in the golden light of the lamp. To him she looked as alive as ever, her beauty untouched, her devotion unchanged. He forced a smile and told the old woman she was mistaken, but her words lingered long after she had gone. That night, Mac lay awake beside Nak. The room was quiet, except for the occasional crack of the wooden beams and the faint whimper of the baby. He told himself the neighbor's warning was just superstition, the paranoia of an old woman too close to death herself. And yet, as he turned, he thought he saw something in the corner of the room. A shadow that did not move with the flickering light, a shape that seemed taller, darker, stretched unnaturally across the wall. He blinked, and it was gone. Days passed, and more neighbors began to keep their distance. Some even left offerings at the edge of Mac's property, not for him, but as protection from what they believed lingered inside. Rice, incense, and flowers, tokens meant to appease restless spirits. Mac grew angry at the insult, demanding to know why they would treat his wife with such disrespect. No one answered. They simply looked away, as though acknowledging him would curse them as well. The strangeness did not end there. One afternoon, as Mac returned from the river, he found the house unnaturally silent. He called Nak's name, but no answer came. The baby did not cry, the usual sounds of life absent. He stepped inside, his heart thudding in his chest. The air was heavy, colder than it should have been. Then, softly, from the back of the house, he heard singing. It was Nak's voice, low and melodic, lulling a child to sleep. But when he entered the room, he found her standing perfectly still, the baby cradled in her arms, eyes fixed on him. She had not been singing. Her lips were closed. Yet the melody still echoed faintly in the air, as though carried from somewhere else entirely. Mac froze. A chill ran down his spine, but Nak only smiled, rocking the child gently, as if nothing had happened. He told himself he must have imagined it, the fatigue of war and long days clouding his mind. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had taken root. The first complication had arrived. It was not a scream in the night, not an attack, not a violent haunting. It was something subtler, quieter, and far more dangerous. The creeping realization that what he saw and what he felt could no longer be trusted. The question lingered, heavy and unspoken. If his wife was truly gone, then who, or what, was living in his house with him? The days that followed only deepened the unease. What began as whispers in the village soon turned into open avoidance. Mac would walk through the market, but vendors no longer called out to him, no longer offered the warm smiles they once did. Instead, they bowed their heads, muttered prayers, and quickly packed his purchases as though eager to send him away. He told himself it was jealousy or grief disguised as superstition. But even he could no longer ignore the way their eyes lingered on him with pity, as though he was already marked by death. The second strange event came late one evening. Mac was sitting outside, sharpening a knife under the faint glow of the moon, when he heard Nak call his name. Her voice was soft, tender, drifting out from inside the house. He rose, stepped through the doorway, and froze. Nak was not where the voice had come from. Instead, she was sitting in the far corner, rocking the baby, silent. Her lips had not moved. Yet he had heard her voice clearly, close to his ear, as if she had been whispering right beside him. When he asked if she had called, she simply smiled and shook her head. That smile, once a comfort, now unsettled him. It seemed too steady, too fixed, as though it hid something just beyond his understanding. Soon, conflict arose from someone braver than the rest. A friend of Mac's from the army, a man who had survived the same battles, returned to the village and came to visit. Unlike the villagers, he was not afraid to speak plainly. He waited until Nak was out of earshot before leaning close and whispering, "Your wife is dead. I saw the funeral pyre. I saw her body burn. Whatever lives in that house with you now is not her." Mac's blood ran cold. He wanted to strike his friend, to silence him, but the words burrowed deep. He thought of the shadow in the room, the song without a voice, the whispers of the neighbors. The seed of doubt grew sharper. Still, when Nak returned, Mark clung to her hand, as though by holding her, he could hold on to the truth he wanted to believe. His friend left quickly, muttering that Mark was blind, that love had chained him to something dangerous. The final clue came one afternoon, small and almost insignificant. Nak was cooking, humming softly, when the ladle she held slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Without hesitation, she bent to pick it up, but her arms stretched too far, unnaturally far, elongating like something out of a nightmare. Mac's heart nearly stopped as he watched it extend beyond what any human body should allow, the delicate hand scooping up the ladle before retracting, as if nothing was wrong. She turned, smiling, holding it out to him. "See, it's fine," she said gently. Her voice was warm, almost innocent. But Mac could not shake the image of that impossible reach, the way her body had betrayed the truth. The house no longer felt like a home. Every sound made him tense. Every smile made him question. He still loved her. How could he not? But that love was now poisoned by dread. Was she his wife, clinging to him from beyond the grave? Or was she something else, wearing her face, feeding off his devotion? The villagers watched from a distance, knowing what he refused to admit. Something unnatural was growing stronger in the house of Phrakhanong, and soon there would be no hiding from it. Mac could no longer ignore the dread that coiled inside him like a tightening rope. Every moment in the house felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground beneath him crumbling grain by grain. He tried to act as though everything was normal, but the weight of the villagers' stares, his friends' warning, and Knock's strange, unnatural movements gnawed at him until sleep itself became impossible. One night, after hours of lying awake beside her, Mac heard a sound. At first it was faint, like fabric dragging along the floor. Then it grew heavier, closer, echoing through the wooden boards. He turned his head, heart hammering, only to find Nak asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. But the sound continued, circling the house like something dragging itself just beyond the walls. He sat up, every muscle in his body tense, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The next day, Mac could not shake the feeling that the walls themselves were pressing in on him. He went outside to find air, only to be stopped by another villager. This time it was a young monk, his head freshly shaved, robes clinging to his thin frame. The monk's voice trembled, but he forced the words out. "You are living with the dead. Please, leave this place before she takes you too." His hands shook as he pressed a small charm into Mac's palm, a sacred thread tied with prayers. Mac stood frozen, the words echoing in his skull. When he turned back toward his house, Nak was watching from the window. Her smile was soft, but her eyes glittered in a way that made his blood run cold. That evening, the truth began to claw its way out. Mac returned home to find the house unusually dark, the oil lamp nearly burned out. Nak sat inside with the baby, humming a lullaby that made the air vibrate, each note heavy with something he could not name. He lit the lamp, but the flame flickered violently, almost resisting, as though the air itself did not want light. Mac decided then he had to know. He could no longer live suspended between love and terror. He waited until Nak turned her back, then quietly slipped out of the room. His footsteps creaked as he moved toward the back of the house. His chest tightened, every breath shallow, but he forced himself forward. The monk's charm pressed against his skin where he had tied it to his wrist. That was when he saw it. Through the cracks of the wooden boards, by the faint glow of the moon outside, he glimpsed something that shattered the illusion forever. Nak was feeding the baby, but the child cast no shadow. Her body leaned forward unnaturally, her arm once again stretching too far, bending in ways bones should never allow. And then she turned her face slightly, enough for him to see her eyes catch the light. They were no longer the warm, gentle eyes he remembered. They gleamed dark, bottomless, like wells that led nowhere but death. Max stumbled backward, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. Nak's head snapped toward the sound. For a moment, her face softened back into the woman he loved, but then her mouth stretched into a smile too wide, too sharp, a smile that belonged to something that should never wear human skin. "Mac," she whispered, her voice low and echoing, as though spoken by many mouths at once. "Where are you going?" He bolted. His body moved before his mind could think, his legs carrying him toward the door. Behind him, he heard the crash of wood as Nak rose, her footsteps heavy, dragging, yet impossibly fast. The baby's cries mingled with the sound, a shrill wail that pierced the night air. Mac burst out of the house, sprinting across the dirt path, his heart hammering against his ribs. The night was alive with sound, his own ragged breaths, the pounding of his feet, and behind him, the relentless pursuit of something no longer bound by human limits. He dared not look back, but he could feel it, the weight of her presence pressing against his spine, the cold air rushing past as though death itself was giving chase. When he finally looked, just once, his blood froze. Nak was there, moving unnaturally, her long black hair flying in all directions, her limbs twisting as she reached for him. Her arms stretched out again, impossibly long, clawing through the night air, her fingers only inches from his shoulder. Mac stumbled, nearly falling, but somehow regained his footing. He ran toward the river, desperate, half believing the water might protect him. The villagers who saw him that night would never forget the sight, a man tearing through the fields in terror, pursued by a figure whose body moved like smoke and shadow, a woman's shape warped into something monstrous by grief and rage. The chase did not end when he crossed the river. She followed, her cries echoing across the water, her voice pleading and cursing all at once. "Mac, don't leave me. Stay with me forever." By then, Mark knew the truth. The woman he loved, the woman he had clung to through war and loss, was gone. What remained was something else entirely, something that refused to let him go. And now, there was no turning back. Max stumbled along the riverbank, his breath ragged, his body trembling from exhaustion and terror. Behind him, the cries of Maynak still echoed across the water, her voice carrying a mixture of sorrow and fury that clung to the night air like smoke. He no longer dared to turn back, no longer dared to hope that what followed him was still the woman he had once loved. The chase had stripped him of denial. Whatever lived in that house, whatever had rocked that child and smiled with those too wide lips, was not Nak. At least, not Nak as he remembered her. He fled toward the temple, the one place he thought might hold power against the unnatural. The villagers, already stirred from sleep by the noise, emerged from their homes. Some cried out warnings, others shut their doors in fear. One or two men tried to intercept Mark, but when they saw what pursued him, their courage dissolved. They pressed their palms together, chanting prayers as he passed, unwilling to look too closely at the figure that shrieked his name from across the river. By the time he reached the steps of the temple, Mac collapsed, his knees giving out beneath him. The monks rushed forward, their orange robes glowing faintly in the lamplight, their faces grim but steady. One of them, a senior monk whose voice carried the authority of years, spoke firmly. "You have been living with a ghost, Mac. You must understand this now. Your wife and child died before you returned. What has been with you since then is her spirit, bound by love but twisted by death." The words cut into him like a blade. He shook his head violently, tears streaking his face. "No, I saw her. I held her. She is alive." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they rang hollow. He had seen the impossible. He had seen the stretch of her arm, the glint of those eyes. He had heard her voice when her lips did not move. The monk pressed a hand to his shoulder, steadying him. "Her devotion to you is strong, so strong that it refuses to let go, but devotion without life becomes hunger. She cannot leave, and she will not allow you to leave either. That is why she struck down those who tried to warn you. That is why the villagers feared to speak." Mac's memories began to fracture under the weight of this revelation. He recalled the strange silence in the house, the voice that called to him when no lips had moved, the lullaby that lingered in the air without breath. All of it began to reframe itself, pieces of a puzzle he had refused to see. It was not love that had built that fragile illusion of family life. It was desperation. It was possession. Another monk arrived carrying clay, carved with sacred symbols and tied with strands of white thread. The senior monk explained, "There is a way to bind her. Her spirit can be sealed, kept from causing harm. But you must accept this truth. What you see is not your wife. If you waver, if you invite her back in, the seal will break." Outside, a scream tore through the night, rattling the temple walls. Maynak had arrived. Her wail shook the ground, a sound that carried both grief and rage. "Mac, why are you hiding from me? Come back. Don't you love me?" The words were a knife twisting in his chest. Every syllable reminded him of the woman he had once held close, the warmth of her hand, the way her smile used to light the room. Mac trembled, caught between love and survival. "She loved me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She waited for me." The monk's reply was sharp but compassionate. "Yes, she loved you so much that she refused to cross over. But love trapped in death becomes a chain. If you stay bound to her, she will drag you into her world. The truth sank in like cold water. Mac realized the price of his devotion. The moments of comfort he had clung to, the illusion of family life restored, had all been built on a corpse's shadow. His wife had died. His child had died. What he had embraced in the night since his return was not life, but death wearing a mask. The monks began their ritual, chanting low, rhythmic incantations that seemed to bend the air itself. One held up the clay pot, its mouth wide and waiting. Another sprinkled holy water across the steps. Mac covered his ears, but the sound of Nak's cries grew louder, closer. He could almost see her through the temple's open gates, her figure swaying, her arm reaching, her hair wild and black against the night. Then came the moment that broke him completely. In the doorway, her face softened. For just a second, she looked exactly as she had before. The same warm eyes, the same tender smile. She held the baby in her arms and whispered, "Mac, please, don't let them take me from you. Don't let them take our child." The monks chanted louder, their voices rising to drown her out. Mac fell to the ground, clutching his head, sobbing with grief. He wanted to run to her, to hold her one last time, but his body would not move. The senior monk's words echoed in his mind. Devotion without life becomes hunger. The pot was raised. The chants reached a fever pitch. The air grew heavy, vibrating with unseen force. Outside, Nak's cry turned into a shriek of fury, a sound that rattled the rafters and extinguished the lamps. Mark shut his eyes, his tears hot against his cheeks, and then, suddenly, silence. The pot was sealed. The spirit was bound. Mac opened his eyes to darkness and ash, his body hollow, his heart shattered. His wife was gone, truly gone this time. And yet, even as relief trembled through him, one question burned hotter than ever. Had he done the right thing, or had he betrayed the love that had followed him beyond the grave? The temple was silent, the monks exhausted from their chanting, the clay pot sealed with layers of sacred thread. Mac sat alone on the stone steps, his body heavy, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the gates. For the first time since his return, there was no humming lullaby, no shadow moving where it shouldn't, no soft voice whispering his name. The night felt hollow, stripped of something that had once filled it. The monks told him it was over, that Maynok's spirit had been bound, her presence sealed away where she could no longer harm him. But Mark could not feel victory. He felt only emptiness, a wound deeper than any blade from the battlefield. He had fought countless enemies in the war, but nothing had hurt like this. The villagers would later say peace had returned to Phrakhanong. The shrine built in her memory would be visited for years, offerings left by those who prayed for love, for children, for protection. But for Mac, peace never came. He wandered the fields at dusk, eyes searching shadows, half expecting to see her figure drifting toward him. Some whispered that he was cursed, destined to live with the weight of what he had done. Others said the pot was never thrown into the river, that the spirit inside still lingers beneath temple grounds, waiting for the day the seal weakens. And on certain nights, when the river is still and the air hangs heavy, locals claim you can hear her voice calling faintly across the water, a woman's cry filled with both devotion and despair. "Mac, don't leave me." Whether it is memory, imagination, or the echo of a love too strong to die, no one dares to answer. Because everyone in Phrakhanong knows one thing: Maynak is gone, but she has never truly left. The story of Maynak shows how love can turn into a haunting, so powerful it refuses to let go. But not every spirit clings to devotion. Some are driven only by hunger, by curses that strip away their humanity until nothing remains but need. From the grief-soaked alleys of Phrakhanong, we now move deeper into Thai folklore, into a nightmare that drifts through the night sky itself. This next tale is not of a wife waiting for her husband, but of something far more grotesque, a spirit cursed to feed, cursed to hunt. A floating head, entrails glowing, slipping silently through the darkness. This is the legend of the Krasu, a spirit whose hunger is as endless as the terror she leaves behind. The story of the Krasu begins not in a battlefield or a bustling city, but in the quiet stillness of a rural Thai village. These villages, surrounded by rice paddies and palm groves, come alive with the sounds of crickets, croaking frogs, and the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. By day, the villagers move about their routines with little concern, the women preparing meals, the men tending fields, the children playing barefoot in the dust. But when the sun dips below the horizon and the sky shifts into its deep indigo cloak, an unease spreads. Doors are shut early, windows are barred, and the silence of the night becomes heavy. It is in this silence that the legend of Krasue takes its place. The main character in this tale is not a husband, not a grieving widow, but a woman carrying a terrible secret. By daylight, she looks no different than any other, her hair tied neatly, her face calm, her body moving gracefully as she walks among neighbors. She can cook, laugh, gossip, and pray, just like the rest. No one suspects her curse, or if they do, they whisper it only when they are far away from her home. Because at night, she changes. The woman's head separates from her body, trailing bloody, glowing entrails as it drifts silently through the air, searching for flesh to devour. Some say she was once a young woman who practiced black magic and failed to control it. Others say it is punishment from a past life, sins that festered so deeply that they followed her into rebirth. Whatever the origin, the curse is inescapable. Each night, when darkness falls, hunger consumes her. She is no longer herself. She becomes the Krasue. The village itself plays as much a role in the story as the woman does. Life here is fragile, dependent on crops, livestock, and childbirth. But it is these very things, the newborns, the expectant mothers, the chickens, and the pigs, that the Krasue hungers for most. Tales spread of babies born lifeless, of animals found in the morning with their throats torn open, of trails of blood glistening faintly in the moonlight. No one admits to seeing her directly, yet everyone knows when she has passed through. The signs are impossible to miss. The villagers try to protect themselves with thorny branches and spiked fences, weaving barriers around their homes in hopes that her dangling entrails will snag, slowing her down, trapping her long enough for dawn to come. They whisper prayers as they close their doors, clutching amulets blessed by monks. Yet these defenses feel fragile, temporary, like trying to keep out the tide with a single stick in the sand. Because the Krasu is relentless, no wall, no charm, no whispered prayer seems strong enough to fully keep her away. The tone of the story grows darker with every passing night. What begins as an ordinary village rhythm, meals cooked, lanterns lit, children tucked into bed, slowly twists into a cycle of fear. A dog barking too long in the distance becomes a warning. A baby crying suddenly in the dark makes mothers clutch their infants tighter. Even the faintest glow seen drifting between the trees makes hearts race, for everyone knows what it could be. The goal for those who live here is simple, but never certain. Survive the night. For the woman cursed as Krasue, her goal is much crueler. She cannot stop her hunger. She cannot resist the pull of flesh and blood. Each night is not a choice but a compulsion, dragging her away from the human life she tries to maintain by day and into the nightmare that defines her by night. This is the setting where the legend breathes, where the ordinary collides with the grotesque. A quiet village that sleeps uneasily, a cursed woman who becomes a monster, and a hunger that no amount of walls or prayers can silence. The stage is set for horror, for once the sun sets and the lanterns fade, the village belongs not to the living, but to the Krasue. At first, the village kept its fears tucked away behind closed doors. By day, the woman at the center of the story was ordinary enough. She laughed with neighbors, traded food at the market, and joined the other women in their daily chores. If there was suspicion in their eyes, they hid it carefully, because no one dared confront her directly. To accuse someone of being Krasue was dangerous, not just for the accused, but for the one speaking. After all, if the rumors were true, angering her would mean inviting her wrath once the sun went down. The first complication began quietly, with animals. One morning, a farmer awoke to find his chickens scattered around the yard, their feathers drenched in blood, their bodies torn open in ways no wild animal could manage. At first, he blamed stray dogs, but when it happened again the next night, and again the night after, his fear deepened. The villagers began to murmur about the Krasu, about how her glowing entrails were often seen hovering near chicken coops, but no one spoke of it aloud in her presence. Instead, they avoided her, making excuses not to cross paths after sunset. The unease grew sharper when a newborn fell ill. The baby had been healthy for the first few weeks, but suddenly its tiny body grew weak, its cries fading into shallow whimpers. The mother swore she had seen something outside her window one night, a faint glow, like fireflies, except brighter, redder, pulsing faintly like blood. When she rushed to check the baby, she found the child's skin clammy, its lips pale, as if something had drained the very life from it. The whispers grew louder. Mothers began to wrap their infants in layers of cloth, placing thorny branches across their windows to keep someone, out. Livestock was moved closer to homes, tied near doorways where families could keep watch. And still, each morning brought new stories of bloodstains, strange glows, or sounds in the dark. The woman herself began to feel the change in how people treated her. Where once the villagers had smiled and greeted her warmly, now their words were clipped, their eyes wary. She noticed how mothers pulled their children close when she passed, how neighbors ended conversations abruptly when she approached. She asked what was wrong, but no one dared to answer. One evening, as she returned from the river, she noticed a group of villagers standing outside her home. They weren't looking at her. They were staring at the ground, where faint trails of something dark had stained the earth. Blood, still fresh, leading away from her doorway and into the trees. When she demanded to know what they were doing, they scattered, muttering prayers, leaving her alone with the silence. The first real question began to gnaw at everyone's mind. Was the woman herself aware of what was happening? By day she seemed unchanged, almost too normal. But by night, when the air grew still and shadows stretched long across the rice paddies, the glow was seen drifting above the fields, a light too bright, too strange to be a lantern. Sometimes it hovered near the homes of expectant mothers, other times it circled the livestock pens, and always, by dawn, something was missing, something was dead, or something was weaker than before. The villagers did not yet move against her. They did not summon monks or confront her directly, but unease had transformed into quiet dread, and dread had begun to take the shape of certainty. Something unnatural was living among them. The woman herself felt the strain, too. She awoke many mornings with her body weak, her throat dry, and strange smears of blood at the corners of her mouth. She told herself it must be dreams, some sickness of the mind, but the stains on her bedding, the whispers of the villagers, and the memory of glowing lights flickering just beyond her window suggested otherwise. The first complication had fully taken root. Something was happening in the village, something that could no longer be explained away by stray animals or bad luck. The hunger of the Krasue had begun to show itself, and though no one spoke it aloud, every villager now carried the same unspoken question. Was the woman they saw each day truly one of them, or was she the monster that hunted them by night? The nights in the village grew heavier, as though the darkness itself had thickened. No one lingered outside after sunset anymore. Families huddled inside their homes with doors bolted, thorny branches nailed across windows, and prayers whispered into the flickering glow of oil lamps. Yet even with every defense, fear crept in like smoke. The Krasu was hungry, and her hunger would not be stopped by wooden walls. The second strange event came when a young woman, 7 months pregnant, began to suffer restless nights. She told her husband she felt watched, that something pressed against the walls of their home in the early hours, scraping faintly, circling their bedroom. One night, the husband rose to investigate. As he opened the window, he caught sight of a faint glow drifting above the rice paddies. At first, he thought it was a lantern carried by a late traveler. But then it moved closer, too fast, hovering weightless in the night air. The glow revealed the outline of a face, pale and detached, entrails dangling and dripping faintly with blood. His breath caught in his throat as the head turned toward him, its eyes burning faintly red. He slammed the window shut, trembling, and his wife clutched her stomach in terror. The next morning, they told no one, too afraid of what speaking the truth might summon. But the husband began building a spiked fence around the house, weaving thorny vines thick enough to tear at flesh. When the villagers asked why, he only shook his head, muttering that his wife needed protection. This act brought conflict. An older villager, a man known for his temper, declared that enough was enough. He claimed the cursed woman among them was endangering everyone, that her presence would eventually destroy the entire village. He began gathering others who whispered the same fears, urging them to demand answers. Some wanted to chase her out. Others insisted she be taken to a monk for purification. But there were also those who hesitated, who feared that if they moved against her and she truly was Krasu, the vengeance that followed would be unbearable. The tension fractured the village. Where once neighbors had lived in harmony, now suspicion and argument spread like fire through dry grass. Every misfortune, whether a sick cow, a wilted crop, or a restless baby, was whispered back to the same source, and the woman at the center of it all could feel the eyes pressing into her back wherever she walked. The strange warning came from a wandering monk who arrived at the village by chance. He was old, his robes weathered, his eyes sharp with the weight of knowledge. When told of the glowing lights seen at night, he grew solemn. "This curse is ancient," he said. "It does not end easily. The Krasu walks because of hunger, and hunger cannot be reasoned with. If you wish to survive, you must keep her from entering. Spikes, thorns, prayers, these are your walls. But know this, if she sets her eyes on you, no fence will save you." The villagers listened in silence, their faces pale. The monk's words did not soothe them, they only confirmed what they had feared. That night, every household added more branches, more spikes, more whispered chants. The village transformed into a fortress of desperate superstition, and yet, still, the glow was seen moving in the fields. Still, livestock was found torn apart. Still, babies woke in the night with unexplained scratches, their mothers clutching them tightly against their chests. The tension had escalated into something unbearable. Each night felt like a coin toss between survival and slaughter, and the woman they saw by day, the one who smiled and greeted them, was now seen by all as a mask stretched over something inhuman. They did not yet act against her, but the air was charged with a single question: how much longer until the hunger of the Krasu turned against them all? The night the village could no longer deny the truth began like any other, quiet, stifling, the sky, a sheet of black velvet heavy with stars. Families shut themselves in early, oil lamps flickering faintly against the wood of their homes. The air smelled of incense and damp earth, but underneath lingered something sharper, metallic, like the taste of blood carried on the wind. The woman, the one who lived like all the others by day, had gone to bed as usual. At least, that is what her neighbors assumed. But one man, the same farmer who had lost so many chickens, had grown too restless to sleep. He sat near his window, clutching a wooden spear tipped with iron. His wife begged him not to look, not to invite the spirit's attention, but he could not resist. He had to know. It was near midnight when he saw it. A faint glow at first, drifting low across the rice paddies. It shimmered red, pulsing, like a lantern carried by invisible hands. But as it came closer, his breath turned shallow. It was no lantern. The glow revealed a woman's head, her eyes open and hungry, her hair floating wildly as though caught in water. Below the neck trailed her entrails, slick and glistening, glowing faintly in the dark. Blood dripped as she moved, sizzling where it touched the ground. The farmer froze, his body stiff with terror. He wanted to scream, but his voice stuck in his throat. The floating head drifted silently toward the village, its eyes darting left and right as though searching. Then it stopped near a house, the home of the pregnant woman. Slowly, carefully, it hovered closer, pressing against the spiked vines wrapped around the window. The entrails snagged briefly, sizzling as if burned, and the crassue let out a hiss. The farmer's blood ran cold. The stories were true. Inside the house, the pregnant woman woke suddenly, clutching her stomach as though sensing the presence outside. Her husband rushed to the window and froze. The glowing face stared back at him, inches away, her lips pulled into a grotesque smile. He shouted, a desperate cry that split the night, waking half the village. Doors creaked open, lamps lit, and soon the villagers were spilling into the dirt paths, drawn by the noise. They arrived just in time to see it, the floating head of a woman, entrails dangling, blood dripping onto the ground. Gasps and screams filled the air. Some villagers fell to their knees in prayer, others backed away, clutching their children, and then a louder cry cut through the chaos. From the far end of the crowd came the angry villager, the man who had demanded answers for weeks. His eyes burned with fury. He pointed at the glowing figure and shouted, "It is her! She lives among us by day, but at night she is this monster." The villagers turned, their eyes wide with horror. The accusation, once whispered, now had a face, undeniable and real. The woman they had smiled at, traded food with, prayed beside, she was the one hovering outside, entrails tangled against the thorny fence. The floating head pulled back, hissing in rage. Her entrails glowed brighter, her face twisting from a grotesque grin into something monstrous, her eyes burning red. The villagers screamed and scattered, some fleeing into their homes, others grabbing whatever they could as weapons, sticks, knives, anything. The woman's body, left behind in her house, lay still and lifeless, eyes closed, as if in a deep sleep. Those who dared glance through her window saw it, and their confusion deepened. How could her head drift through the sky while her body lay unmoving? Was she alive, or was she cursed beyond life and death? The monks had warned them, but now the truth was laid bare. This was not rumor. This was not fear twisting shadows into monsters. This was Krasu, real and hungry. And she had chosen their village as her hunting ground. The farmer finally found his voice and shouted, "We cannot let her feed. We must stop her before she takes more." But no one moved closer. No one dared face her glowing entrails dripping with blood. The villagers stood frozen between their fear of her wrath and their terror of what would happen if they did nothing. The night was no longer ordinary. The village was no longer safe. What they had feared, what they had whispered about in secret, had revealed itself fully. And now the question hung heavy in every mind, too sharp and terrifying to speak aloud. If Kraswe was one of their own, What were they supposed to do with her? And worse, how many nights had she already fed, unnoticed, while they all slept unaware in their fragile, spiked cages? The villagers stood frozen, the glow of the krasyu pulsing in the night like a lantern from some other world. Fear rooted them in place, but the revelation could no longer be ignored. This was no story to frighten children, no shadow misread in the dark. The spirit was real, hovering before them with entrails dripping blood onto the soil of their own village. The body, left behind in her home, confirmed what many had whispered but none had dared to believe. The woman lived by day as one of them, her face human, her movements ordinary, but when night fell, her head tore free, leaving her lifeless shell behind. The rumors of chickens found torn open, of sickly newborns, of trails of blood, all of it now had a face. The puzzle pieces locked together with dreadful clarity. A monk who had traveled with the wandering elder weeks before stepped forward from the crowd. His voice was calm, but his words were heavy. "She is cursed." The krasyu is born when sins cling too tightly to a soul, or when forbidden magic twists the body. By day, she is human. By night, hunger claims her. That is why her body lies still while her spirit feeds. You are not wrong to fear her, but you must also understand she suffers. The villagers erupted in shouts, some crying that they should burn her body, others demanding the monks bind her as they had once bound Maynak. Mothers clutched their infants, men gripped their makeshift weapons, the air vibrating with the raw panic of people forced to face what had stalked their nightmares. But in the chaos, the krasyu hovered silently, her eyes locked on them. And, for a moment, there was something almost human in her expression. The farmer, voice trembling, shouted, "Why our village? Why our children?" The monk's answer was simple. Because hunger is not guided by choice, it is guided by need. She returns here because this is where she lives. She cannot go elsewhere. She is bound to you, as much as you are bound to her. The words reframed every moment the villagers had lived through. The woman's polite smiles by day, the strange weakness she sometimes carried, the bloodstains she tried to hide. She had not been a predator who chose them. She had been a prisoner of her own curse, and yet sympathy did little to dull the terror. Hunger was still hunger, and the krasyu would still kill if they did nothing. One of the braver villagers, the same man who had led the cries of accusation, stepped forward, brandishing a blade. If she cannot control herself, then she cannot stay among us. We must end this tonight. His words were met with murmurs of agreement, but also with silence from those who feared retribution. Because even weakened by thorns, even glowing and grotesque, the krasyu radiated power. If they struck at her, would they survive her wrath? The monk raised his hand for silence. Killing her body may not free you. If she dies in anger, her spirit may remain, forever hungry, forever cursing this place. The only way to end this is to bind her hunger, to trap her as Maynak was trapped. He held up a clay pot, carved with sacred inscriptions. The villagers gasped, some remembering the legend of the pot sealed with Maynak's spirit. But the krasyu hissed then, her entrails flaring, her eyes glowing brighter. "Do you think you can trap me as you trapped her?" she spat, her voice both human and inhuman at once. "I have fed. I will always feed. You cannot take this from me." Her words sent a ripple of dread through the crowd. It was not only hunger that drove her, it was pride. It was rage at her curse, rage at the villagers who feared her but had lived beside her in silence for so long. She was not simply a victim of her hunger, she had embraced it, sharpened it into survival. The monk's words reframed the horror one final time. She cannot be freed unless she chooses to let go. If she clings to hunger, if she clings to this life, she will remain. Every death, every drop of blood, will tie her more tightly to this world. The villagers fell silent. The truth was unbearable, yet undeniable. The Kresu was not an invader from some distant place. She was one of them, cursed, chained by hunger, but still carrying fragments of who she had been. To end the nightmare, they could not only fight her, they would have to sever her bond to the living. The glow from her entrails cast shifting shadows across their faces. She hovered there, eyes burning, lips curling into a smile that was both woman and monster. And in that moment, the villagers realized something far worse than the hunger itself. This was not just a curse of flesh. This was a curse of choice. And if she refused to let go, then the village would never truly be free. The night ended, not with resolution, but with silence. The Kresu, glowing entrails dripping onto the dirt, hovered a moment longer at the edge of the thorny fence. Her eyes swept over the villagers, faces pale, weapons trembling, prayers whispered under ragged breaths. Then, with a hiss that echoed like steam escaping from the earth itself, she lifted higher, drifting into the night sky until her light disappeared beyond the treetops. The villagers stood frozen long after she was gone. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. When they finally turned toward her house, they saw her body lying inside, still and lifeless, its chest rising and falling faintly as if in shallow sleep. Some wanted to destroy it then and there, to burn it and scatter the ashes into the river. Others insisted that touching her body would only unleash something worse. The debate ended with no decision, only fear. By dawn, the village felt hollow. The fields seemed quieter, the air heavier, as though the soil itself had absorbed the terror of the night. People went about their work with downcast eyes, avoiding the house at the edge of the path, pretending life could resume as before. But the glow of that hovering head still burned in their minds, impossible to forget. To this day, villagers whisper that she still returns when the moon is full, her entrails glowing faintly across the paddies, her hunger guiding her to whatever blood she can find. Some say the monks never managed to bind her. Others believe she was never meant to be bound at all. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the fields are drenched in fog and the air smells faintly of iron, people claim they hear her voice drifting through the dark. A woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, asking the question no one dares answer. Will you let me in? I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.